Well, good morning, everybody. I'm Trinity Vandenacre, and this is Life in the West. Now, the other day I gave you a tour of the Stone House in Winston, Montana, and today we're going to cover a little bit of the history of that place. If you missed that tour and you want to watch it, I'll leave a link somewhere, or you can go to Life in the West on Facebook page and find it there.
The Stone House of Winston, Montana is a landmark well known around Montana. Many people wonder what stories it has to tell, and that's what we're doing today, is telling those stories.
Well, I just got out of a meeting with Matt Deal, who's the owner of the property that we're talking about, where the Stone House is. So the owners of the Stone House now is actually Winston Livestock Company, and they are allowing me to do this, but I would appreciate it if I want to make sure everybody understands that I have permission to go out here and film it and kind of show you guys what it looks like and tell you the history of it. They're a little concerned about liability. They don't want a bunch of people on there. And it is on private property. It's completely private. There's no public access to this thing at all. Keep that in mind. If you have any questions, you can ask me, but they just wanted to make sure that people knew that it was private, and for liability reasons, they don't want people in there because, as you saw, there's, it's a little rough on the inside. So just want to let you know that. Now let's go across the street and let's look at what we discovered about the history of this stone house.
The first thing that I discovered about the Stone House was who built it. You can go down to the county courthouse in Broadwater County and look up the patent that was filed by Warrant S Dodge for this particular piece of ground. He purchased 155 acres from the U.S. government in 1892 for an undisclosed amount of money.
And Warren was a man who lived on big dreams, and those dreams revolved around something that drove men mad for centuries. It drove good men to murder and decent men to steal. It's a thing called gold.
The reason I know this is several records of Warren Dodge purchasing mining claims around the area with the help of investors from Helena and especially Great Falls.
The newspaper of Winston was called the Winston Prospector, and in that newspaper you can see that Warren was involved in every type of committee that you can possibly imagine. He was involved in everything. He was involved in mining. He was the chairman of the county commission. He was one of those guys that was bigger than life, and I think the house really portrays that he wanted to show, this is where I'm going. I'm going big places. I like nice things, and even though it's kind of built in the reminiscence of some of the mansions, the old mansions that are built in Helena, and they were in existence at that time, so he would have known about those. You can see some of the man that Warren was by looking at the craftsmanship of what he had built. This is not a practical home. This is not the warmest thing in the world. There is no insulation, and rock really doesn't do anything for you except for cool you down in the summertime. In the winter, in the brutal winters of Montana, it's not that good. But that's not what this house was about. This house was meant to impress. This is who he was. You can see the details in the woodwork, the craftsmanship of the windowsills. It took time and energy and a lot of money to build this house. That kind of a guy with those big of dreams kind of makes you wonder why he chose Winston. I mean, podunk little Winston? But you gotta realize that now Winston doesn't look like much, but back then, in the time of the mining and a lot of gold being found, Winston was a booming town. They had a school, they had a store, a post office, busy streets, and the tough men mining them in the hills would bring their ore down to Winston loaded on railroad cars to be shipped. So you can see Dodge was thinking that this place was going to be the next Helena. It was going to be a place where fortunes were made. The problem was that Dodge's dreams were bigger than the production of his businesses. In the 1900 census, there were 5 people living in this stone house on the prairie. Dodge and his wife, and then 2 boarders and a servant. Now I assume the servant was probably employed to take care of the Dodges and all of their paying guests. And the reason I say that is because I believe they rented out some of these rooms as kind of like a boarding house to make extra money. But in 1903 and 1904, he starts to fall on hard times.
I know this because in the Winston Prospector in 1905, we find this notice. This notice is to the co-owners of the Winston Mercantile Co. and Corporation, so all of his businesses. And then we find another one in the same year that names him personally to W.S. Dodge and his heirs and executors and administrators. And these notices were to inform him that he had 90 days to pay a very large sum of money that he owed for something to do with his mining operations.
At the same time, you notice in the Townsend Star paper, he was shown as not paying his taxes. Immediately after this, he left the state of Montana and ended up in San Francisco. So the dreams of Warren Dodge, in Montana at least, had come to an end.
This is where most people lose the trail of who owned the stone house in Winston. But looking through paper articles in the Winston Prospector, I found a small snippet stating that Warrant S Dodge was in town to meet with some old friends, and that he had obviously moved for a short period of time to Whitefish, Montana. In the same paper, however, down below, it says that Reverend W.E. Fisher was renting W.S. Dodge's ranch, and this is in 1904. This is what I couldn't tell, was renting that ranch, did that include the stone house? Through much research at the county, it's very confusing how they have it in the books. It actually got lost as to where that property is. But looking up the actual document or deed, in 1906, I found that the property description outlining the stone house actually was sold for $1 to W.E. Fisher in 1906. So here we pick up the trail again with a man named Fisher.
One man's misfortune is another man's fortune. And I can imagine that W.E. Fisher and his young wife looked at this place and thought, wow, this is pretty cool that we're able to rent. I mean, this is the fanciest house in the neighborhood. This is the fanciest house in town. This was a special place. I can imagine, especially for Catherine Fisher, who was his wife, knowing women and how they appreciate houses. I mean, to them, it's all about the house, right? To be able to come into this, where everybody would look at you and go, you'd probably be the envy of the town. At least it was important enough to put in the newspaper. So the newspaper thought that it was a pretty special thing. I think I understand Fisher and I mean, can you imagine? Let's think about the best house in your town. I mean, like the biggest, fanciest thing in your whole town. And think, you have the opportunity to move into that. Can you imagine? Would your wife be excited? I think so. I know my wife would be. And I think that's probably how the Fishers felt. They thought, wow, we have an opportunity for something amazing, to build a family in this fancy, classy house. As you and I both know, with the current situation with COVID-19 causing all kinds of havoc in our lives, life doesn't work always the way we want it to. Real life is a little bit more cruel. Little did Fisher know that his dreams and his journey would just start to look good and then come to an abrupt and untimely end. As Fisher was walking home from working in a hayfield that was very near to here because he was walking to his house from that location, a man named Norby began to follow him, and his intentions were obviously no good. William Fisher told him to stop following, and he probably did it fairly forcefully, and Norby refused. So Fisher picked up a rock, and instead of leaving, Norby also picked up a rock and threw it at Fisher. With that one unlucky throw, Catherine Fisher became a widow. His two sons, who were 9 and 4 at the time, lost their father, and little Helen would grow up never knowing her real dad. And all the plans that W.E. Fisher had were lost in the mists of time.
2 years after the death of W.E. Fisher, Catherine Fisher, his wife, sold the property to Arthur Deal. Arthur Deal is an ancestor of the Deals who own it right now, and their company is called the Winston Livestock Company. Catherine Fisher eventually moved to Helena, married a German man, and raised the 3 kids that she had had with Fisher in Montana City.